Jenna Bush Hager has a new book recommendation that she believes will bring hope and joy to readers. While the Today Show personality and her colleagues continue to rally around anchor Savannah Guthrie during the continued search for her 84-year-old mother, Nancy Guthrie, Bush Hager is putting fans onto a new book that she says is just what she's been needing lately. Right now, I'm looking for love, hope, and joy anywhere I can find it. Bush Hager, 44, wrote via Instagram on Friday, February 13th, while promoting Laws of Love and Logic by debut novelist Debra Curtis. And this book brings me all three. Laws of Love and Logic officially releases on Tuesday, February 17th. Bush Hager and Curtis will appear together at Dogwood Books and Gifts in Greenwich, Connecticut on Thursday, February 19th to talk about Curtis' writing process and the book's beautiful love story. Bush Hager told fans who are thinking about attending, "I hope you'll join us and leave feeling a little more joyful and hopeful." Redheart. Meanwhile, on the Today Show, Bush Hager and the rest of her NBC colleagues have been providing the latest updates on Nancy's disappearance during each broadcast, while also continuing to send their love and support to Savannah. Related, Savannah Guthrie's missing mom, Andy Cohen, reveals how Today co-hosts are coping. The search for Nancy is nearing the end of its second week, after authorities believe she was taken from her home in Tucson, Arizona, on Sunday, February 1st. On Thursday, February 12th, Savannah shared an Instagram post with photos and videos from her childhood featuring her mom and her siblings Annie and Cameron. On a wet and ordinary Friday in mid-February, Jenna sat at her kitchen table with a mug that steamed the way grief sometimes does, slowly, insistently. Outside, light from a late winter sky lay low over the neighborhood, pale watercolor of roofs and bare branches. Inside, a paperback rested in her hands like a small, steady thing, a debut novel whose title promised a mechanics class kind of certainty, Laws of Love and Logic, and whose pages, she would later tell viewers and followers, brought her love, hope, and joy. She had written those exact words a few minutes earlier on Instagram, fingers still warm from the posture of composition. The sentence felt honest and private and, in that moment, necessary. The country's living rooms and commuter cars were filled that morning with a different kind of attention. Across studios and teleprompter lanes, Jenna's colleagues were doing the work they do best, bringing facts, finding compassion, bearing witness. But this week their words came wrapped in something quieter and heavier, support for a colleague whose life had been suddenly and painfully scrambled by uncertainty. Savannah's mother, Nancy, had gone missing more than a week earlier. Police were still piecing together the night of February 1st, the place from which she was taken, and the long, unsettled hours thereafter. Savannah had shared a collage of family photos on Instagram the day before, memories that read like an anchor and a plea at once, and the newsroom had become, in equal parts, a stage and a sanctuary. That tension, between the public and the private, between journalism's bright, efficient cadence and life's messy, unanswerable questions, had been present since the first moments Jenna had learned. She remembered when a producer had first whispered the news down the earphone line, a missing parent, local authorities investigating, a sense of confusion and dread that made the rest of the day's items, travel tips, celebrity profiles, a weather segment, feel suddenly small and fragile. The anchors rearranged their notes. The cameras found new angles. But in the pause between segments, in the moments when the lights dimmed and the studio hummed down to a soft thrum, there was a different type of work happening. Calls placed, hands held, texts exchanged. Jenna found herself paging through a book she hadn't yet had time to finish because it offered, in its sentences and its quiet plotting, the exact counterpoint she needed. A story about ordinary people who find their way toward one another, toward small acts of grace, toward meaning. The book, by Debra Curtis, a fresh voice whose debut was set to arrive in bookstores on Tuesday, February 17th, was a romance of a sort, but not the kind that lived solely in satin and fireworks. It gathered itself around the simple idea that we are allowed to be changed by each other, and that everyday rules, of tenderness, of stubbornness, of letting go, can sometimes be as useful as any philosophy. Jenna had read a passage that morning about a character who, when faced with the obliterating cold of bad news, made a point of leaving a light on in the kitchen so that someone coming home late would know the house was a harbor. Those lines lodged in her chest. She posted them sensitively for viewers who had been living with the same hard news all week. It was not a grand gesture. It was a domestic promise. The internet, even when it's noisy, listens for promises. She could have kept the book to herself, curling further into the private solace of narrative, but Jenna had always understood the contagiousness of a good thing. As a co-host on a national morning show whose rhythms are stitched into millions of routines, she knew the currency of recommendations. People asked for them because in the small, steady exchange of media there was an intimacy. Tell me what moved you, and I will take it into my day. So she posted, and she wrote, and she meant what she wrote. Right now, I'm looking for love, hope, and joy anywhere I can find it. And this book brings me all three. It was the kind of thing the audience wanted, not as a diversion, but as a map. The community that blooms around morning television thrives on ritual and on the soft labor of communal feeling. For many viewers, the anchors' lives are less about celebrity and more about companionship. They are people who are present while coffee cools, who offer a quick outline of the day, who share in the small, repetitious acts of human connection. When hosts like Jenna speaks of seeking hope, the plea is both personal and collective. People listen because they, too, have been looking. The week had been drawn with long lines. At work, segments were rewritten so that updates about the search could be handled with care. The anchors moved through the newsroom like people walking on a softened surface, deliberate, vigilant, protective. Savannah, whose presence on air had been steady though visibly strained, wore her public grief in a way that steered clear of spectacle. She would read police bulletins, hold up a photograph of her mother, and then, between items, pivot with the practiced gentleness of someone who knows how to translate love into action for an audience. The number to call, the places to check, a tone that still carried warmth toward viewers who felt implicated by their ability to help. Jenna and other colleagues would step in when needed, to cover a report, to offer a hand, to let the camera find another face while Savannah took a breath. Small assignments that were at once professional and humane. Outside the studio, newsrooms had begun to receive their own kind of traffic. Flowers left at the station's doors, letters folded into envelopes with words like "We are with you" scribbled across them, neighbors asking what they could do. The modern rituals of solace are hybrid, part analog, part digital. They move through feeds and paper and quiet conversations. Jenna, reading in the hush of her kitchen, could feel that dexterity of communal care. She'd imagined that the book, the way it had been billed, a beautiful love story, might be a bridge of sorts, a private emblem that could also be an invitation. She wanted to offer it up not as a way to distract Savannah from the search. She would never have suggested that, but as a small lighthouse for those nights when the world felt shapeless. The author's event, scheduled for Thursday, February 19th at Dogwood Books and Gifts in Greenwich, Connecticut, felt like a kind of punctuation mark. Dogwood was the kind of independent bookstore that seemed designed to look modest on purpose. Low wooden shelves, a well-worn armchair for readings, a front window that caught the quarter light like a promise. Jenna imagined the evening as a different kind of newsroom, a room where words could be given without the rush of breaking news, where listeners might let themselves breathe. She and Debra Curtis would appear together, talk about craft and love and the way small lives make the largest claims on us. Jenna expected, honestly, that her own sense of urgency, the private part that had been racing since she'd learned about Nancy, would soften in that company. On air that week, the show's reporting on the search balanced the brittle and the practical. Savannah had posted a family montage on February 12th, 2 days before Jenna's Instagram, a collection of grainy home movie frames and sunlit portraits that were both affectionate and aching. The images were ordinary, an arm around a shoulder, a birthday cake mid-blow, but they read as collateral evidence of a life, the kinds of photos that show the world how it once was and how urgently it should be recovered. Viewers reacted as viewers always had, with curious mix of tenderness and an insistent desire to take action. Tips came in. People recirculated updates. The social networks turned themselves into a neighborhood watch, a chorus of voices holding open a map of possibilities. Back at her kitchen table, Jenna turned pages and considered the mechanics of hope. The novel's protagonists were not saviors. They were people who learned to notice the small obligations of care, picking up a call, answering it fully, making a meal, holding space for someone to grieve. There was a scene where a character wrote a letter to someone they had hurt years earlier. It was not the seismic event of confession, but a necessary, humble repair. The idea that leading with smallness